Right, welcome back. So the next session is, we've called it Logistics, and we have a panel of 5 people here today who can hopefully help you through that quagmire. So a couple of them are already sitting here because they wanted to get to the head of the queue at Dover, so they're already here. So you know Tom, the person sitting next to him, I'll introduce him while he's there. That's Tim Ridyard. He's from Ashtons Legal, but focuses and specialises on transport and freight. Also on our panel, we have John Lucy from the Freight and Transport Association. Welcome, John. We have Peter Bishop from the London Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Peter. And we also have Les Hall from Velta. So a lot of you will know Les and know of Velta. So I'll ask them to give a brief introduction, and then we'll crack on with the questions. So I'm going to start with John, if I may. Would you like to go first?
Hi. Morning, everyone. So, in case you don't know, the Freight Transport Association is probably the 4th largest business organisation in the UK. We represent some 18,000 members from the logistics industry, not just the providers of logistics services, but also the buyers of the logistics services. So our members are tend to be the large fleets, also ports and airports. Basically, most of the large retailers tend to be our members. We have a real we believe we've probably got one of the best handles on what's going on in terms of the end-to-end supply chains and the consequences, particularly of a no-deal Brexit, and we've been doing a lot of work with various government departments over the last 12 months on this now. This is ramped up now. We're doing lots of, we're doing 20 haulier workshops per week, and we've now evolved that into shippers workshops, which we've just started in Northern Ireland, which is obviously a huge problem. For the logistics sector, we recognise there's 4 impact areas really. One is the regulations. Last time we had customs on freight moving across the channel, it was 1993. Then there was over 100 agents in Dover, now there's 5. Every type of freight that's going to be moving across the water, and now obviously in the Irish Sea also, there's going to be customs regulations. So be under no illusion, if you're leaving the UK to go into mainland Europe or now into the island of Ireland, there will be customs requirements. You will have to have documentation. If you haven't got arrangements in place now, it's highly unlikely you're going to be able to do something before next Thursday. The infrastructure and the capacity within the freight forwarding and the customs agency is just not there anymore. In terms of cost, someone mentioned that before, approximately 13 billion cost in declarations alone is HMRC's estimate for the UK economy. So there's a big looming issue in costs alone, and this isn't taken into account in delays. And by the way, Operation Brock starts on Monday. There's, I'm sure you've all heard headline figures, there's 10,000 vehicles a day crossing the Dover Straits. Operation Brock is going to cater for 11,600 of those. And the delays aren't for vehicles coming into the country. These are vehicles backed up from Calais. Just to put some flavour onto that, a couple of weeks ago we'd done the first trial with DFDS ferries into Dover Calais with 100 guinea pig drivers, if you like, on that ferry. We arrived at Calais with the correct customs procedures. This is basically a demonstration to see how it works on a day. And in my fictitious load, my fictitious lorry, it took me 2.5 hours from arriving to leaving Calais. And that was a holding area of 100 vehicles with an initial holding area of 100. So by my personal estimates, I would say 3 hours of arrivals from the ferries, then the vehicles are backed up into Kent, and that's where Operation Brock comes into place.
Well, thank you. Thanks, John. I will now ask Les if you would like to just give a brief introduction.
Hello, I'm Les Hall. I'm the General Manager at Velta. Many of you know us from our long association with the MIA and PLASA as a freight forwarding agent and logistical provider. I've worked in the freight industry since 1975, so some 18 years before the single market produced a frictionless and borderless trade between the UK and Europe. So I've been there, done it. We know what's going to happen. Facilitating that is going to be difficult, but there will be a way. I'm a little bit more optimistic about the possibilities of being able to achieve the clearance procedures on both sides of the border as long as you're prepared. And being prepared is what you need to be. ERI numbers, packing lists, invoices, possible declarations or certificates of origin, things that you can talk to the Chamber of Commerce about, you can talk about with your carriers, your chosen carriers at the moment. There are lots of things that you can do to make this transition that much easier. Earlier on, it was mentioned that if we do leave somewhere between now and the 31st of January, we don't actually leave until the 31st of December, or up to 2 years later. Tom said it could be 3 years from the 1st of January this year, and it could be. Nothing will change in that transition period. So as long as this withdrawal agreement bill is ratified by Parliament, you've not got to worry too much immediately. But being prepared is what you really need to do. And talk to, gentlemen asked for virtually, not free information, but cheaper information where you can go. Talk to your carriers. They should be able to assist you in every way they can. That would be my advice.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to ask Peter Bishop from the London Chamber of Commerce to give a brief intro. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Peter Bishop from the London Chamber. I'm actually the Chief Executive of the London Chamber, the interim one. I took over from a guy you may have heard of, David Frost. David Frost, the EU Sherpa, the chief negotiator for the government in getting the withdrawal agreement changed, the Theresa May one changed, and what we've got now, good or bad. So I've taken over from David. I was the deputy CEO for many years before that, and my subject is international trade facilitation. I'm here specifically for the ATA Carnet because I know many of you are users of that. The London Chamber of Commerce is the national guaranteeing organisation for the Carnet in the UK. I chaired the International ATA Carnet Council, so there are 78 countries in the world that use carnets. 15 million of them issued every year. No, that's wrong, but lots of them. So I know it from the other side too. We also issue certificates of origin, of course, and that will be both preferential and non-pref with the FTAs, and I'm sure there'll be questions about that too. So I'll wait for that to kind of react, Peter.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Peter. And Tim, would you like to give a brief intro?
Thanks very much. My name's Tim Ridyard. I'm a solicitor and a partner at Ashtons Legal, 400-strong firm, East Anglia based. I head up our regulatory team, and most of my work is spent looking after road transport operators, primarily in the area of operator licensing and representing them in front of the regulator, the traffic commissioner. And latterly, my work has been some of my work has been involved in getting ducks in a row for clients, often in conjunction with trade association like the FTA, to ensure a state of readiness. And I sense in this room, most of you are not actual operators, but you are dependent on road transport, so need an awareness of the challenges facing the road transport sector in the months ahead. And following on from what was said previously in the last session, I think what I would say is ensure that you have all your customs and paperwork and information and documentation in place so that the haulier, the operator who's going to be transporting the music tours around Europe, whatever, have got everything they need for a seamless movements throughout Europe. And the problem is, as I see it, for the sector, at every stage you've got potential additional burdens at borders. That has knock-on effects with drivers' hours rules and all this on this kind of thing. Perhaps more training, perhaps more staff. I don't know if you've got to do wet stamping of carnets and things like that. Perhaps come back to that later. So there are a huge number of issues there that need to be thought through. And if you're aware of the problems that you'll hear about in this session that are facing the transport sector, that will smooth things along for your business. There are all sorts of issues. There's operator licensing, which is has been one of the big things. Obviously, you need an operator's license to operate outside the UK. There has been a deferment, even if there was a no-deal Brexit in a week's time. There is a deferment. There are special measures in place to allow international road transport operations, now ratified by the European Parliament this week, until the 31st of July next year. So there is respite in that sense. There are other things which I think we'll cover as we go along, perhaps including the Operation Brock that was mentioned at the end of the last session. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We've already heard from Tom about his intro. We've strapped him to the chair until it's time for him to leave, so which will be after lunch. So there we have some, obviously we have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge sitting in front of us. There must be some questions from the floor regarding transport, movement of people, movement of goods. There's got to be. There's one. We need a microphone.
Hi, I'm Terry Sargent. I work for a German camera manufacturer, and my question's a logistics question. We run a sort of small store at the moment. We service cameras cameras that are manufactured in Munich. We service them. What's the likely implications on movement of goods after this?
Okay.
I mean, obviously we've stocked up and we've bought a lot more stuff than we need, but that can't last forever. What sort of duties are we going to have?
Okay, could I, Tim, would you like to go with that one first?
Is that a duty? That's a duty question. Is that, could you deal with the?
Yes.
Okay.
Depending on the deal, if we stay within the EU, obviously nothing changes. If there's a free trade agreement, your duties coming into the UK should be zero. If there's a no deal, the government have suggested they're going to introduce a temporary tariff regime which will zero out, I think this was alluded to earlier, zero out 88% of products to a 0% duty. That's a temporary measure that will last for up to 12 months, possibly beyond. Going the other way, the UK becomes what the WTO or what Europe will regard as third country origin status. They will implement WTO rules immediately, and our products coming from the UK into Europe will attract duties. The other thing that will change is VAT in the event of a no deal. A no deal, VAT should, I believe I'm right here, in saying return to or go back to postponed accounting procedures rather than upon arrival in the UK. If there's a trade deal, I'm afraid the same things will occur. If you trade or import from outside the EU at the moment, you're well aware of the procedures. Read the same scenario from Europe if there's a no deal. China, America, Australia, Europe, it'll be exactly the same. And the temporary tariff regime that the government have intimated they will put in place will be throughout the world for all world trade. So if there's a deal, you shouldn't get any duties. If there's a no deal, you shouldn't for a temporary period. But if you're exporting your products to Europe, there will be duties, I'm afraid.
Okay. Tom, any change on that or any update on that, or is that absolutely up to date?
That's up to date. The only thing I'd say, you said, if there's a free trade agreement, the caveat applies that could take a while to negotiate. In the event of a deal, that's true for as long as the implementation period that's agreed pending any free trade or future relationship agreement thereafter.
Okay. Any other questions? Yep. There's a question here, and there's a question back there. So.
Just to confirm that with Tom, has the government confirmed that 0% temporary regime will come into force?
I'd have to check, but I believe so. It's up on the gov.uk website, which normally means if it's published on there,
okay,
it's live policy.
Fine, thank you.
Okay, there was a question.
Could I just add something to that?
Yeah.
It's only a draft document at the moment. Whilst the government have said they will implement it, it's still only a draft. It hasn't been uploaded to the chief system, the customs system that we use. They can't do that yet, but it's only a draft at the moment.
Okay, we have a question coming from the back.
Hello, I'm Stephen Page. I run a production, design and rental company. I've got three questions really. The thing that we're interested in mainly is temporary importation and temporary movement of people and workers into Europe. But I have three quite basic questions. Firstly, is the worst case the equivalent of import or exporting equipment to somewhere like the UAE, where we're looking at, as you said before, EORI numbers, packing lists, etc., etc.? Is that the worst case we're currently envisaging in terms of documentation?
I believe that to be the case, yeah.
Okay, so
you'll
as
need
long as you've
export
got a good-
declarations, you'll need import declarations, paperwork. It should be.
Okay, so we're not anticipating worse than that?
From a documentation
Yeah.
no.
Okay, I'm happy about that then. The other thing we do is that we're based in Manchester. Most of our freight would go through Hull or the non-channel ports. We don't really hear anything in the media about likely outcomes for goods goods going through non-channel ports. Does anybody on the panel have a view as to how specifically non-channel ports might be affected, and is there anything in place to deal with delays at those ports?
Yeah, the Humberside ports are the winners in Brexit, if you like. As DFT has predicted, the freight movements from Dover will decrease by up to 60% in volume in the first 6 months in a no-deals Brexit situation. So obviously the East Coast ports are going to pick up that extra freight, which is obviously going to push capacity to the limit. For Hull, there's like a mini operation Brock, if you like. The whole port is served by a dual carriageway straight through the main town, and they reckon they've probably, I think it's only a few hundred trucks they can hold within the port itself before the town backs up. And the concerns there is that the actual crews for the vessels and for other vessels affected by this will not be able to actually get on the ships, and the port itself may become blocked inadvertently. And for Immingham, it's the same problem really. I think that's half a mile of queues outside of the dock gates. It goes across the entrance to an oil refinery, and the concern is there obviously that although there's certainly going to be no fuel shortages as a result of Brexit, it's just indirect traffic problems may cause issues for the delivery trucks coming in and out of the refinery. But the processes are exactly the same. Whichever port you're going out of in the UK, it's the same. You still need customs declarations. There's no silver bullet in this. It is what it is. Customs declarations will be required. Just an added point on the documents for the music industry, as well as the ATA carnets. Obviously, if you temporary import and export, which I'm sure you're going to be producing thousands more per year as a result of this. For the merchandise itself, there's a bit of an issue really for the trucking side of the industry, because when you're taking out whatever the figures are, thousands of brochures or T-shirts, and you're bringing back half of them, or whatever the figure is, unsold, how do you get them back in? If it was all going to go out and come back again, you could do it on an ATA, I think I'm right in saying. But the issue is, what do you do with those, the return of the goods? And there's a big question mark on this. And worst case scenario in a no-deal situation, if you got a tour on tour right now, and it's going to come back on the 1st of November, and for some reason we do end up falling out next Thursday, there's going to be duties liable on those goods coming back in, and there's a sort of black hole of information about HMRC when it goes to these sort of scenarios. Really, there's lots of operational details that really might cause a lot of problems for the industry.
Yeah, I think the point was, does one need two sets of paperwork? The ATA carnet with the pure tour bit, and then a second set of paperwork in relation to the merchandising, which is absolutely vital to the sector, as I understand it. The other point I know that we may be coming to in due course is also what happens if you're out on a tour and then Brexit happens. It's a long tour or something like that, and what happens in terms of customs paperwork that we didn't need on the outbound leg, but you do on the inbound. What happens in that scenario?
What we've got on our website on the Carnet issue about goods going out before a potential exit from the European Union and then coming back, and we have left, is 4 scenarios that come into play depending on what kind of markets you're going to. I won't go through all 4, but we have got the website address link in the presentation that I sent over, and no doubt you'll be sending that round. Coming back to the certificate of origin, just for a second, absolutely, the certificates of origin will have a role to play thereafter. The format that we use now, when I say thereafter, I mean in a no-deal scenario, is an EU one. It's called the EU, in fact, it's called an EC certificate of origin. That won't be pertinent, of course, but the format that it's based on is Appendix C of the Kyoto Convention, and so we've just cut and pasted that as the UK, that is, and that will be the document used. So that after the exit date actually happens, if it happens without a transition, then that document has been prepared by the government and by the chambers too.
Did you have something to say on this, Tom?
Yeah, so just on that, if someone is on tour and they leave before we sort of fall out of Europe without a deal and come back in having, Britain having left that deal, the government advice on that is to provide a copy of an export declaration. There will be a kind of a period in the event of a no deal where Border Force will kind of be acting with a bit of discretion. So as long as you can prove with any paperwork that what you're bringing back into the UK came from the UK, Border Force will act with discretion and take that in that scenario.
Which is fine on the UK side, because obviously HMRC has made a lot of unilateral decisions and waivers and easements throughout this whole process, but the vehicle's got to get to the UK in the first place, and if it hasn't got an export declaration from the EU, it will just not be allowed to embark, and that's a big misunderstanding. There's this idea that vehicles are going to be run around the UK and the continent without any declarations being carried out. From what I've seen, or what we're seeing, there's just no way a vehicle's going to be allowed anywhere near a ferry to either go out or to come back in. So, yes, that's a good easement, but it's still got to be able to arrive here in the first place.
Okay, you had another question, I think.
I think they're all covered, thanks. It's all good news then.
Brilliant, yeah. Okay, any more questions? There we go. Martin has a question.
Hi, possibly a naive question.
Who are you
Work
first?
For a company
Sorry.
called PSAV now. We've got branches across the world. When we currently transfer equipment across Europe with our German depots, Paris and the like, we just ship equipment around willy-nilly, and different bits will come back to those that go out on no particular timescale. We've got depots in the Middle East. I don't know from a naive point of view, because I never thought to ask it. Everything we usually send to the Middle East is either temporary tour, so we know it's a 3-day period, it's a 5-day, a 2-week period or something, or we permanently put it there. When does a temporary carnet become permanent? I.e., could we send stuff, if it's still owned by the mother company, and of course we've got multiple trading limited companies across the world, when does it become an export as opposed to just being a long-term loan within the group?
Well, carnet by definition is for 1 year. So if goods going out on a carnet must return within that. If they don't, then you pay the duty and the sales tax and a penalty as per the Istanbul Convention, which is the overarching convention for that regime. If you go out, take out a carnet, not knowing whether you're going to bring them back, well, you generally pay the price. Is that the answer?
Possibly. Yes, I don't know. In that, yes, we've got stuff in Germany that's now contracted for 4 years. It will come back in 4 years' time, maybe. So yes, that we would have an issue of paying duty on our own equipment to bring it back into the UK.
Yeah, well, 4 years, I mean, yeah, it's a long time, isn't it? So who knows?
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? We had some other questions. Where were they? So we have a question at the back from Simon.
Thank you. Hi, Simon Miller from Nutri Insurance with the PLASA's approved insurance supply. It was just a quick comment, actually. So in the event of a no Brexit deal, one consideration if you're taking your own vehicles across to Europe is that you will need the green card that used to be in play many, many years ago, and also the drivers will need the international driving licence. If there's a deal agreed, that won't apply, but if we do drop out, be it next week or in a few months' time, just be aware that insurers will need probably a 5 to 7 day run-up to get those green cards issued, and there might be a bit of a cost attached to it as well.
I think some of the questions that we've been asked is around when moving goods across Europe, and they come from the UK and they go over to mainland Europe, because the origination of the goods was in the UK. Does that mean that each border that they go across when in mainland Europe, do they have to go through other customs? Will they be slowed down, in other words, or will they once they've got into mainland Europe, can they just freely travel around mainland Europe?
Depends where you clear your goods. If you clear your goods at Calais on arrival, then they're free to travel throughout Europe because they're in free circulation, the same as they would be if they came into the UK at the moment, free circulation. If you want to clear your goods at another border, the community transit rules will return, and you can get a T form that will enable you to move your goods freely until it reaches its destination, where the customs declarations can then be made. In reality, I believe most of them will be done in Calais.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Any questions? Any further questions? There's a question at the back.
Nina from Roscoe. We sometimes receive an order, say from Germany, and we ask a supplier in Spain to drop ship to Germany. How will that be affected?
In terms of customs, you mean? Yes. Well, it's EU goods, so it doesn't really matter where it's coming from. It's just EU goods, so the country of origin, as far as you're concerned, it just needs an EU export declaration to be made, and it will need to be imported into the UK.
Will nobody want a tariff because we're being paid for the goods in the UK?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
We're being paid for the goods in the UK. Will nobody want a tariff for movement of goods?
Well, the tariff will depend on the type of goods. I mean, as we said before, 88% of the imports for a temporary period will be tariff-free, so it depends what the type of goods are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Oh, sorry, yeah.
We sometimes, because our shipments are fairly small, we sometimes ship into distributors in Europe for consolidation forward onto other parts of the world outside of the EU. Obviously, it depends on what type of deal or no deal happens, but how would that be complicated with the forms that we'll have to fill in?
T form. Get a T form. Your goods can then travel from the UK to their destination under bond, basically, and then when they're exported, the T form will be discharged by an export declaration from, say, Germany to the UAE or outside the EU. That's what the community transit regime's for.
Okay. Matt?
Hello, Matt Lloyd, 3LR Lighting. Quick question for manufacturers' warranties. We often have a 5-year warranty now, and Europe, of course, is a big trading partner. How does it work if I have a piece of equipment that breaks in a theatre in Italy, and I send out a bit of kit from UK at 0 value, because it's replacing it, and bring back the faulty bit of kit? Is that all acceptable in the new regime?
Yeah, that's not a that's not a carnet question. That's a customs regime question. So return. Well, I mean, I'm not a customs expert. So.
Well, it would just be a UK export to the EU, and if they do need to come back at a future date, it will be an EU export to the UK.
Would I have to transact any money or tax in order to maintain my warranty service to my customer initially?
Well, duties will be payable on the import clearance of the goods anyway. So whenever it's imported, it's clear customs into Italy, for example, the local duties and VAT will be paid at that time.
It'd be a zero value invoice. It'd be zero value because it's free replacement.
UK exports are not zero rated. It's EU imports into the UK. UK exports will fall under this WTO tariff.
So the value of the goods would be zero because it's a warranty repair? Would they recognise that in this situation?
No, you'll need to have a value for customs purposes. You could consider bringing the piece back to the UK under another customs regime called inward processing relief, where you can bring them in free of charges and re-export them free of charges, duties and taxes, as if you're only bringing them in for repair. If you're sending a part out, I think as my colleague has said, you'll probably get charged for duties and taxes going into Europe, but it will require a value.
So where do we find out that value? How can we confirm we're being legal?
Take a chance.
Okay.
I'm afraid I can't tell you at this stage.
I think it's a serious note. In a manufacturing, you put a warranty in for 5 years on products now. That's a potential significant cost if you have a product that starts to fail in Europe, if you have to pay tax on it.
The temporary tariff list, for want of a better word, I think it's 3 volumes, has been launched now, so that's publicly available now. So you can check your value of goods. And to be fair, to do an export declaration anyway, you would need the origin, I believe. You would need the tariff value and so on and so on. So you wouldn't be able to do an export declaration without that information anyway. So as soon as you start moving things, you will discover that.
Or make products that don't break down.
Hello. I'm Martin Waugh from Syntax Audio, and it's kind of following on from what the previous gentleman was just saying. We represent various European manufactured products in the UK. I'm not going to bother about how I import them. I think I've got that bit covered. But we regularly consolidate repairs under warranty at our offices here, and about once a week we send those repairs back to the factory in Germany where they are repaired. So it's kind of the same question. At the moment, I just send the goods, they get repaired, they come back to me, that's fine. In the future, will I have to make customs declarations? And I used to send stuff to India for repair on one occasion, and the old trick of making a commercial invoice where everything's just valued at $1 or £1 or whatever. So you end up having to pay a few pence or whatever. But is that going to be acceptable in the future, do you think? Ha 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 ha, he's laughing.
I think the answer to that is something called outward processing relief and inward processing relief, which is designed for exactly what you're talking about. So if you research that on HMRC.
Trevor.
Yeah, just to append to those responses, in Martin's question and this gentleman's question here from the lighting company, we again export to extra EU countries, and in the event of warranty repairs, the inward processing relief occurs. The tip is to make sure you keep your records straight, neat and tidy. So invoices with serial numbers, all of the details of the shipping documents so that they can be matched to that invoice and that product. And that is the only way that you can bring things back in and send them back out again, duty and VAT free. That's our experiences so far. And that information is available on the government websites again, but it takes ages to find it. So asking chambers of commerce or your freight trader associations, or even Velta, of course, have been very helpful to us as well to find that sort of information out.
So just to be clear, if a customer has a broken bit of kit and I want to send them a replacement, I'm likely to have to pay something for that on tax and duty. If I ask them to send it back, I could get it for free.
Could I just add something to that? If you've manufactured it in the UK and you're bringing it back, you can always bring it back as British return goods.
In a similar vein, we manufacture a product, a bespoke product, goes out to a country. If it's manufactured wrong or we've made a mistake, we will then remake it and free issue it. The value of the goods isn't warranting bringing it back and then of no use to anyone else, so they're normally just binned. Have I got a charge, even though the second lot will be zero value to my customer, and it's only going one way? We would normally send it with a zero-rated invoice. Would there be duty and tariffs applicable to that, even though there's no commercial value to the transaction other than negative to myself?
The answer is yes. Yes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because you have to do a customs declaration, so it doesn't matter to the UK revenue if there's no value to your customer. It's you're making a declaration.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left in this particular session. We have a question over here. Duncan?
I just want to revisit with respect to, let's talk about a tour's worth of equipment that's overseas and it's out there now. And from what I understood earlier, there'll be some honeymoon period with respect to our local customs, but did I sense there was an issue on the other side that the truck gets to the port and at that point actually it can't enter the UK? Was I correct in hearing that?
Are you moving under ATA Carnet?
Well, I guess that is what I'm talking about, because as of today, I've got equipment overseas that I haven't done a carnet for, and it's coming back in 11 months' time. It's hypothetical, as it turns out, but this is the question.
Well, as Tom said, we believe there's waivers on the UK side of it, but HMRC can't talk for the EU customs authorities. That's the official advice.
Yeah.
So the ruling, and this has been, everyone in the sector is asking this question really, and the ruling so far as we understand it is you have to do a full import declaration from the EU if there's a no deal or whenever we do get a deal. So it's November, January next year, whatever the date is. They've gone out without anything, so they're coming back into the country. So once they cross customs territories, there has to be some sort of customs process. You can't, it's black and white system.
Duncan Bell from Autograph, sound equipment sales and rental business. It's a very similar question to just sort of expand on that same thing about existing equipment that's out there, for Tom to pass up the chain. That I think it identifies a really big issue for existing productions that are out of the UK and will at some point come back. You know, as a rental company, by definition, our equipment comes back. It will have left the country without any paperwork at all because it's free movement. Some of those shows are out there for 6 months, 18 months, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. So two questions really. Well, one, can that be fed back up as being a major issue that faces small businesses that just simply won't have the resources to pay those costs? So there needs to be slightly more than a slightly vague, let's take a view on it at the time sort of approach to it, which is what I'm hearing at the moment. I think the other thing is that we do a certain amount of stuff on carnets. What's the situation in terms of how you do that if you know it's going to be out for longer than a year? Is there any long-term carnet mechanism, or how does one deal with that?
So just on the first point, yeah, I mean, this is something that we're really live to, and we have picked up a lot from the sort of theatre sector and orchestras especially, with their sort of long-form tours. So yeah, no, that your first point, that's something that, as I say, we're really live to, and we're sort of engaging in ongoing discussions with the relevant parts of government about coming up with a more satisfying answer. As is clear at the moment, there isn't one, because part of the issue is that we can't speak for the EU states. What we are saying is to check with the sort of customs arrangements of the sort of EU as a whole, and then the individual states within it. See what advice they're providing, but other than that, it's really difficult for sort of the UK government to speak for the EU. On the carnets question, I would defer to the London Chamber of Commerce.
On the 6 year versus 1 year, I mean, the convention is absolutely clear that it is only for a year. So what companies have done in the past is take them back and then take out a new carnet. Now, that might not suit in your case, but I'd have thought for that period of time, never mind the carnet, that provided you can demonstrate that this is for a particular purpose over a period of time, then you will either come to an arrangement whereby you may have to pay duty. I don't know, but to have certainty in it, it might be better not to use a carnet.
We are running out of time, so time for one final question, if there is one. There is way out.
Hi, I'm Kath from Sennheiser UK, and we basically import stuff from Germany into the UK. My question is, obviously, hi-fi equipment is on the lower scale of things coming into the UK. How far down the scale are we compared to, I don't know, medicine and things like that? As in, how long will we be expected, with everything in place, as in if we have all our paperwork, to go through the border? Because obviously we will be lower down the queue than, I don't know, fruit and veg or medicine.
There's no priority on products as such, so perishables aren't going to get priority in Operation Brock going out, and they won't be getting priority in the Calais area if they're coming in. So the queues will be 1 to thousands or maybe none. I mean, I know you're saying you're optimistic about the queues, but if you can imagine if this is going to happen next Friday, if there's 5,000 vehicles a day heading down to Dover, what percentage of those are going to be 100% correct in terms of paperwork? Well, you could say, well, optimistically, 90%. So that's 10% of those vehicles. That's hundreds of vehicles aren't going to be ready, and that will just escalate over the days to follow. So there's a problem on the other side as well, on the EU side. I mean, this is not just a UK problem. You've got all the EU 27 logistics companies and transport companies all basically begging us every day. So what do we do? What do we tell our members? How do we get stuff moving? I mean, there is a core of logistics companies and all the big names that, you know, they are the ones who are going to be able to move goods in a day one situation, because they work with the rest of the world. They understand all the systems. They've got software that talks to HMRC. They have agents in Calais and every other European country and capital, so they can move freight. It's not there's no freight is going to be able to move. The problem is the legitimate freight, which is correctly I would say border ready, if you like, in terms of paperwork, will probably get caught behind the 10% or the 20% or 30% or even 40% of vehicles that are just taking a chance. But once the whole idea about Operation Brock is to keep vehicles away from the ports that aren't deemed border ready, and the final check for if that vehicle is allowed to embark the ferry is a ferry company themselves. Now, that's not a full customs check. They're just looking for certain MRN numbers or an ATA carnet that's being stamped and so on and so on. And the legal terminology is they have reasonable belief that the vehicle is ready to ship, and that's it. But between Dartford Bridge and Dover docks, in those thousands of vehicles, if it comes to a really bad situation, there's going to be hundreds of those being turned around and sent back north to wherever to wait an indefinite amount of time until the problem is resolved, which is probably going to be going back to the shippers in the first place.
There's going to be a very strict regime that's going to be implemented in relation to this, so that if you don't have as we said, if you don't have the correct paperwork, you are going back to the back of the queue, and indeed fixed penalties of £300. In fact, I understand there's a regime for fixed penalties on the other side in France. Is that correct?
Being in France, it's €1,000.
Yes, it's €1,000 on the other side if the paperwork isn't correct on that side. So certainly, Operation Brock will be very heavily policed by DVSA, as we understand it. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're out of time, unless there's just one very quick one. No? Okay, well, we are out of time on this. We need to move on. In the meantime, I hope that you've had some of your questions answered satisfactorily. I'm sure the guys will be hanging around for a while if you want to go and have a conversation with them during lunch. But before we bring up the next panel, can you show your appreciation, please? Thanks very much.